the future. And just adjust this a bit. And so one of the things that we did was we did a lot of survey work, and I can explain exactly how the methodology and how we did the research. But I wanted to share the highlights with you. Maybe we'll start a discussion, and we can talk a little bit about and talk through the issues about what will change in the workplace, say in 5 or 6 years from now, compared to now. So I thought I would just start with some highlights of the research. The first highlight, which is perhaps not too surprising, is that 2/3 of people we asked said they would like to use more personal tech and personal applications for work. So this has been happening for years. Now the focus of this survey was on younger people, so people age 35 and under. And sometimes I get questions, well, what about older people? And the answer is yes, they do too. So it's just not quite as high as 66%. So what we get when asking younger people is just a higher percentage. But pretty much everyone who's sort of digitally aware wants to use more personal tech for work. The second point there is that a lot of employers have been working for a decade or more to be more flexible. You know, working from home, working away, using different tools for your job. But actually what we found is there's still some work to do. So about 1/3 of respondents said that their employer still wasn't flexible enough for their needs, or flexible enough for them to get the job done wherever they happen to be. The other interesting finding was, you know, we do a lot of research into what people want to use at work. And what was interesting in this finding, and I'll talk about it in more detail later, was that there was more of a focus on applications rather than devices. So it used to be that when we spoke about bringing your own technology to work, people were thinking about their phones or their devices, their tablets, right? Now we're thinking more in terms of applications. And then the final point is that actually basic communications infrastructure isn't quite up to standard yet to get new types of work done. So what we found was that about over 1/3 of respondents said that they felt their employer didn't really have a mobile-first approach to the workspace, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And then the other finding, which was very interesting, was we asked workers, where do you get better broadband? Do you get better broadband at home, or do you get better broadband at work? And 10% more people said they have better broadband at home than at work. And that's really a real challenge for operators, right? Because actually, with more work being done, not just say, you know, in an office, but in other environments, and not just home, but cafes or public transport. What we also found was there wasn't actually adequate broadband in those third places, like in cafes, restaurants, retail operations, trains, and transport, where there's still a lot of work being done. So the issue isn't just bringing the office up to standard in terms of broadband, but also bringing these other places up to standard, which you know, for a lot of service providers is a real challenge. So I often talk to people about Wi-Fi offers, so like service provider Wi-Fi offers, and you know, they're often sold to retail shops as a way to attract customers. And I think that's true, but most retail shops think of customers as, oh, well, they're here having a coffee, or they're here buying something, or they're waiting for someone, say in a doctor's office. They don't see people as necessarily working in their premises. And so the people walking through the door isn't just your customer, it's actually someone also who might be doing their job. So how can you enable them to do that? So actually that's something that I tend to stress a lot about the fact that where you go is less important than what you're doing. So work used to be a place we go, you come to work in this building, but more and more it's about something we do throughout the day. And sometimes we do it at unsocial hours. And throughout the day, we're invoking different technologies in order to get the job done. So I create this kind of slide to show a clock in the middle, that it's not that these technologies are in a box in an office campus or an office building behind a security firewall, right? It's that actually throughout the day, you're calling on applications or services that are dependent on security or analytics. They might be Internet of Things applications. It might be augmented or mixed reality. There might be some artificial intelligence in there. So I really present this especially to service providers, and I say, look, it's about thinking about work beyond your immediate client and their office infrastructure. And it's about enabling their employees to work flexibly wherever the business case requires that. And therefore, when we look at these, I think we chose 10 technologies. I try to say, well, which ones will be invoked for different applications or business processes throughout the day? So that's one way of looking at these 10 technologies that we think are going to kind of transform the workplace. Another way of looking at these technologies is rather than thinking about them as when an employee uses them, I like to think about when is the enterprise impact going to take place. It's probably a little difficult to read from that distance, but I'm happy to share the slides after for you guys for a reference. But what we did was, it was about 5 of us analysts sat together in a room, and we thought, as part of this research, we thought, what of these 10 technologies that we chose, when is going to be the greatest impact? And what will that impact be? And if we just start at the top, I'll kind of talk you through this. On the y-axis is what we see to think is enterprise impact, degree of impact on the enterprise. And here I'm talking about the CIO buyer, right? And then there's time across the bottom. And you'll see at the top security and digital identity. And security and digital identity is something that is important now. I mean, everyone prioritizes security. I mean, when I used to do research, I would say, how would what is your top priority other than security? Because every IT director's top priority is security, right? So if you want to find out what else, you have to say, aside from security, what else are you interested in? But you'll see that I appended the words digital identity. So what we see is security is moving from an environment that, again, is focused on securing an office, right, to securing a person, to securing who are you and what are you doing accessing these corporate resources. It doesn't really matter where you are, right? So instead of having a perimeter around the office, we're having a series of kind of micro perimeters around each of you. So your credentials allow you access from anywhere to corporate resources. And so that's the concept of security and digital identity, not just security. If you look at the next line down, consumerization of IT, I think that we have reached peak consumerization. Now, what I mean by that isn't that it's not going to continue, so it's not going to decline in terms of how important it is to take account of. It's going to decline in terms of the fact that most enterprise IT departments, I would say in the next 2 or 3 years, will have developed a policy around use of personal devices and personal applications in the workplace. And there will be systems in place to implement that policy. So toward the end of the forecast period in 2026, it will be less of a burning issue for most CIOs. And there's a real shift from consumerization being device-oriented to being application-oriented. And I'll explain that in a slide a little bit later. You see there also virtual collaboration for virtual teams. We've all grown up in an age where collaboration or unified communications means the telephone on up, telephone, instant messaging, unified messaging, voicemail, email, maybe conferencing services. And what we see now is a new generation of collaboration products that are web-based, all about team working. Cisco Spark is a good example we were talking about this morning. And so we think this will take off over time, and we'll see people transition from seeing collaboration as just unified communications or telephony-based to starting from the web and starting from the concept of teams working together in distributed environments. Analytics is something that will grow in importance over time. A lot of service providers aren't sure what to do with all the data they have about employees or consumers across traversing their networks. But we see analytics being baked into bunches of services and solutions going forward. Other areas I'll quickly talk about would be programmable networks or 5G. So the promise of 5G for kind of network on demand and network slicing, software-defined wide area network services are very much in the same bucket. We see increasing interest from enterprise buyers to procure network or wide area network as a service in the same way in the same way that they buy cloud services now. So I think we're going to see an alignment between network and cloud services more tightly than we do now. And then if you look at some of the things at the bottom, like augmented or mixed reality, this is an area that's having an impact in consumer, B2C. I don't see as much of an impact in business to business. But I do think there will be some impact in some vertical markets for some applications. So in other words, in an environment where, let's say, there's maybe in healthcare, digital remote diagnosis of certain issues, maybe in certain dangerous areas, like for exploration in mines, okay, you could see, or training purposes, you might use a VR headset. But is it going to be a mainstream collaboration technology across most industries? No, it won't be. So we kind of mapped all the text against sort of the impact that they have. So this is our kind of consolidated view. But I thought I would take some time to dig into some of the specific insights from our users. So this is about the users. So I mentioned that we interviewed 1,200 workers. We did it in 3 markets, in developed markets, in North America, Asia Pac, and Europe. They were 35 years old or younger. And we followed up those 1,200 quantitative interviews with 300 qualitative interviews, discussions with them, as well as 10 interviews with the supply side, so service providers, telcos, tech companies, and large enterprises. And we started, just to start at the top, we kind of started with, well, tell us the thing that will have the biggest impact on work. Tell us about the technology that will have the biggest impact on work. And I should let you know that this slide we produced, where was it? This slide here we produced on programmable networks, 5G. We produced this before we got all the survey results back. So it was interesting to see that the #1 thing they wanted was super fast mobile broadband. So actually, even in a business context, what they really want is really high-speed mobile connectivity. Kind of like consumers, which it shouldn't surprise any of us. And that's what we, as an industry, or as an agency that supports the industry, need to focus on. You can't really do any of the other cool stuff if you haven't got the basics right. And then the question is, how profitable? How much do you have to invest? And how much time do you have to make money off that investment? Because as you know, especially with 4G, you spend a lot to invest, and then the premium isn't quite as good as you expected, or you might have a small window of opportunity to realize gains from that investment. Millennials were also really aware of the IoT and big data and analytics, but we don't think they necessarily knew what they were talking about. So when you ask someone about the IoT is actually hundreds of applications. So we just think they know it's hot, they've read it's important, and they're thinking it could have an application. And with big data and analytics, I think it's roughly similar. They hear about big data and analytics, but they're not sure exactly how. They know it will have an impact, but they're not sure how. And what's interesting is from a service provider point of view, service providers are absolutely core to the delivery of super fast mobile broadband. They're important in the IoT value chain. They're not, they're critical, you could say, but they're not actually in a position in the value chain where they make that much of a difference yet. They're not skimming off the real profit there. And in big data analytics, lots of service providers are thinking about how they can productize this, what they can do with big data and analytics to make their network services better, to make their security services better, etc. Or to give insights to their customers, which is another opportunity they have. So I mentioned earlier that there was a kind of a little bit of a shift in mindset from bring your own device to bring your own application. And this is what this chart really talks about. We ask people, do you use consumer applications at work? The light red is I do, and IT is aware of it. And the dark red is I do what I want, and IT doesn't even know. So when you add up people who do what they want, whether IT is aware or not, it's 60%. Now, a lot of you might say, well, some of these applications are pretty benign, right? Like WhatsApp. Maybe we all use WhatsApp for work. It's encrypted, and people are usually not sending really sensitive things over WhatsApp. So there is some risk there, but not like too much. Although I think it's not necessarily very professional. I think if in certain industries, may not be professional, but it's sort of, I wouldn't say okay, but it's not as worrying as some of the things they're also doing. Like, for example, one of the most popular consumer applications is consumer cloud storage that people use for work. Now, if you think about sending documents or things that are very sensitive to the industry or sensitive to your job, and thinking, well, actually, it's too much bother to access the servers or to use corporate resources, I'll just save it on my own cloud storage, or I'll send it on Gmail. This is what people are doing across all industries, and I think this poses a huge risk for organizations. So for me, I feel like that there's a very important imperative here to somehow gain visibility. First of all, what is it that people are doing? You can't always control it 100%, but what is it that people are doing? How can we mitigate the risk? Because you can never reduce it to zero, but you can at least have a governance structure in place as a company to mitigate the risks. And what kind of analytics or security are you deploying in order to, or what kind of other applications are you offering as a business in order that people aren't attracted to consumer applications anymore? So we see a lot of focus on those issues by enterprises. And a lot of service providers are trying to offer managed workplace services that take those needs, this consumerization, consumer apps needs into account. And this just explains some of the reasons that they're using their own consumer applications. It's because they're familiar with them. The ones at work aren't as easy to use. And they want to use the same one for personal use and for work use. They just want all their stuff in like one place. And one of the things that we've found is that IT is often a barrier. So the reason why people go around IT is they don't feel the IT department really helps them. It's certainly something I feel. It's a bit embarrassing because we work at a technology analyst house, but our own IT team is pretty poor, and the service they deliver isn't very good. So I often think, I wish I could get rid of my work laptop. So you can have it, and I'll use my own because it's just, too locked down. It's very interesting. I think there's a finding a little bit later, but I'll just bring it up now. One of the pieces of the research focused on like IT directors at large companies, and they said they're facing an issue in that when they look for a particular application to deploy for their workers, they often choose the worst technology with the better user interface, because they're measured on uptake. So they're forced to take something that is an inferior technology, but because it looks prettier and they think people will use it more, they choose that over the better solution. So there's a kind of important factor that needs to be taken into account as this generation moves to eventually become the IT decision makers. And this just emphasizes collaboration, the importance of collaboration. So we ask people, if you're not provided with these things, what's the thing that you most want work to provide you? And when we forced a choice, so they were only allowed to choose one, you'll see that in red, team collaboration applications came before Apple products, other tablets, or wearables, right? And it's really interesting because I think if we asked this 3 or 4 years ago, people would have said, oh, I want the newest device. I'm not sure they would have focused on the #1 need being team collaboration application. So I think this is a sign of a few things. One is a sign that people don't see collaboration as unified communications because the work already provides them telephony enough that's not the issue for them. What it shows is a certain maturity, that an IT awareness of younger people in the workplace, that they see beyond the flashy device. Now, I will say that this was done in developed markets. So we did Singapore, the United States, and the United Kingdom, where, and I think this is true across the board actually, if most people in these kind of jobs have the device they already want in their hands, they don't necessarily need work to buy another one for them, or to buy one in the first place. Maybe in other markets that's not the case, but certainly here, I think if you want an iPhone and you have a job, you pretty much get one. So I think that we've shifted from device to application centricity, the real tough application is collaboration, enablement of teamwork is what these younger people are really keen on. I wanted to talk a little bit about security, because all of that other stuff sounds good, but if you can't secure it and deliver it in a way that is acceptable in your industry or to the regulator or to your customers, if you're a large business, then the millennials can wish for all of that, and those older can wish for all of that, but we won't deliver it to them because you have to be a responsible IT provider. So we asked them a little bit about security, and these are the two standout responses. Right? The first one was 3/4 believe security, encryption, biometrics are critical to the way they work. I'd love that to be 100%, but at least we have a good degree of security awareness among this cohort of people. But they told us something else that was very interesting. Almost half said security is so restrictive or inadequate that it actually keeps me from doing the job as effectively as I can. So I actually, when I normally talk, and I have a little notebook, and in the back of the notebook, I have all of my corporate passwords written down. And the reason I wrote them down is, you feel free to check my voicemail for me. You can definitely book a holiday for me. I'm very happy for you to submit my expenses. All of these things are password protected, but I don't know why. They're not particularly sensitive. And they all have a different password protocol, right? So I just think it's easier to just write them down. Now, I think that's the case for a lot of people, and we need to think of a way as we work with more applications, more systems, and as we employ people. You know, many companies are employing contractors. They're working in partnership with their channel partners or their business partners and on a similar projects, right? How do they work beyond the walls of the company with people in other companies, right? How do you federate that? Security is going to play a much more important role. So we tested this a little bit more, and what we found was, if we ask millennials, what would you give away? What would you give away in terms of your personal data in order to have better access to applications or services with less obtrusive security? This is what they told us. They said, well, actually, we're more comfortable giving away application usage data and voice prints than some of these other areas. Now, regardless of what is red and what is blue, basically what we found was a large percentage of millennials said things like this at the top. I'm willing to share personal data. Unfortunately, it's just become an easier way to function. So again, I feel like there's an opportunity for telcos to play on this. A lot of times they will, through analytics, have application use data. They may collect voice prints if they deploy a solution such as this. There may be ways that they can secure access to corporate resources without having to ask for a password, right? For example, now that I'm here in Malaysia accessing an application, it might say you need to give a password, right? But if I were back home in the UK, in my usual places of work, they'd be like, well, what, you know, we see where you are, we understand this is probably you, so that the security protocol is slightly different. So we feel that over the next 5 or 10 years, through AI and analytics, there might be much more sensitive managed security services deployed by telcos for their enterprise plans. The final finding from the user side I wanted to share with you is a little bit about what IT means in the future. So we asked people whether they could code, and about 14% of people said we can code. And then we took those that left them behind, and we said, for those of you who said you couldn't code, would you be interested in learning how to code? And 57% said yes, which is really surprising. I mean, I'm not sure I would say yes, but 57% said yes. And there is a real hunger among younger people who are to learn and get training. And we spoke to some HR people, and they said it's very noticeable in this generation that they really want to take as much from a job as they can in terms of training and skills, maybe move to the next job afterwards, but their expectation is their employer will continue kind of lifelong learning. And when we meet here by coding, I don't think it's necessarily, we phrase it this way, small apps for use in the workplace. It's not necessarily like coding C++ or coding Java. It's all about customization of the work environment. It's about, okay, well, give me a platform on which to build, I can pull assets and build my own little personal workspace. It's customization of a workspace. I wouldn't say it's coding from the ground up, right? It's just this idea that IT needs to be platform-based, more adaptable, and then it's going to be more distributed and democratic in the workplace of the future. It already is. Consumerization has forced some of that, what we call democratization in the enterprise, and this is going to continue to be the case. So as a telco, I kind of advise that actually there's a role to play in kind of secure access to development platforms or solution platforms, sort of APIs and things like that, especially for large enterprise clients who need to customize applications and solutions for their business. So that was all the user view. So I wanted to just move on a little bit and contrast that with decision makers and then give some examples of what service providers are doing globally. So if we look at this, what telcos are booking in terms of revenues, this is large enterprise only. So this is 1,000 plus employees, and it's for managed services. So it's where they provide a managed service to the enterprise. This is our forecast. And what you'll see is, I want you to just look at the red line. The red line is managed mobility. The blue line is unified communications, which we see as kind of merging in the future. But one of the interesting things is that although the red area is small, if you look to the right, you'll see that over the forecast period, it's got the quickest growth. So what do we mean by managed mobility? We mean mobile workspace services, device management, application management, device lifecycle, virtualization of desktop environments. It's the whole suite of services that come through, and it often involves unified communications as well. So, although that's a separate line on this forecast. So this is actually an area that's small. It will remain relatively small in terms of the whole stack of services that telcos offer large enterprises. But it's growing pretty fast. So what are some of the things that we're looking for? Which are the technologies? And again, this is decision makers. These are buyers in large enterprises. What are the technologies that will have an impact on the workplace? So you remember we showed what users thought would have an impact on the workplace: broadband, mobile broadband, IoT, and analytics. And what we see here is analytics and IoT. It's good to ask a different set of people. You get the same answers. Analytics, IoT, communications platform as a service, and artificial intelligence. And AI, I don't have the time to speak at length on this, but we see AI being deployed by enterprises in order to solve service desk issues, right, or serve customers better. Very early days, and we see a lot of telcos adopting AI in their own networks to analyze what's going on and to heal their own networks and to create more efficiencies. But it's nice to see a little bit of overlap here in analytics and IoT between what the decision makers of today versus the young people of today, they always have to say. So there is some nice alignment there. And then we asked specifically about mobility. We said, what are the goals of your technology investment in workplace services? And I've put a star by the areas that are the rank 1 and 2 sums are the highest. And you'll see if you start at the bottom, the first one is to improve employee productivity. Unsurprising, that's what people do when they deploy workspace technologies. The question I have is, how do you measure that productivity? And can you make a connection between investment in those technologies and improved productivity? So it's very difficult to make that link. But we always advise that there's a couple ways you can do it. One is you can deploy consultancy services if you're a service provider or a systems integrator to measure to measure the ROI and the impact of a particular technology, to provide consulting services about which business processes can be impacted positively by the deployment of these technologies. The use of analytics will also be key. Some other areas, obviously creating a more flexible workforce is important, and also security is at the top, securing and protecting the organization's assets. So again, you see productivity, flexibility, security, things that the users also felt they wanted. So there's some good alignment here as well. And you'll see this too in this result, which is which are the objectives that are most important. And you'll see security, legacy application modernization, which is all about mobilizing applications, right? And then the very important point is the third one, which I haven't touched on lately, unifying management across mobile and fixed work devices. So a lot of interest in especially large businesses saying, why do we have one management platform for our fixed computing devices and one for our mobile? We really want to manage across both because they're doing the same thing for the employee, right? So we see a lot of this unified management, unified mobile management, and fixed device management as well. And that's another driver. So I just wanted to sort of end on a few service provider strategies. So knowing what we know about the users and knowing what we know about the buyers, what are some of the service providers doing globally? These are not Malaysian or local examples, they're global examples. What are they doing to meet these needs? So the first thing I wanted to say was, we're a services analyst, so we're focused on, network services, mobility services, unified communication services, cloud services, security services, right? But we also have a team within OVM that focuses on technology. So this is the enterprise mobility management platforms. A little hard to see the names, but there's Cisco, BlackBerry, Citrix, IBM, Mobile Iron, VMware. And what you see here is, aside from this little one in the middle, when you look at their capabilities, which we rate, actually almost all of them are roughly the same. So maybe this one is a little different, maybe that one's a little different, but pretty much you've got about 7 or 8 solutions that are technically roughly equivalent. And I always say, what this shows is it's not about the technology, it's about the service around the technology. So telcos will take these platforms and then make them real for their enterprise clients. So what are their strategies? So I've got 3 telcos here to talk about. The first one is T-Systems. So T-Systems is a very systems integrated oriented approach by a telco. So it behaves, it's owned by Deutsche Telekom. It behaves almost like a systems integrator. And here you can see what I would call their systematic approach, their packaged approach to this for large enterprise. You can see on the left they have an essential package for Workspace. What this is things like kind of administration and management of the assets, some self-service for users to report issues, or self-provisioning, securing it, and providing some service desk. And then on top of that, they have something called shapes, which is, in other words, what kind of business are you and what kind of workers are in that business? Do you have 6 or 7 profiles of workers? Are you digital or classic? So they have the classic working at the bottom, which you can get as standalone, or you can get it in conjunction with digital working. Classical working is things like typical desktop management services. Okay? And then workplace shapes of digital working above is a little bit more virtualized, less premises-based, more delivered out of the cloud, whether private cloud or public cloud, etc. And then there's options that come in on the right. So for example, if you have a large number of requirements to support people in terms of mobile working, they have that including collaboration services. They can even do application services, and they have enhanced support. And on the right, a menu of optional services. And this is presented in a way so that people can, after the initial consulting and assessment, people can digest this according to the needs of different groups in their company and pay accordingly. Something that they mentioned that I wanted to just stress to you guys is the importance of what they term it light management of data of devices. So typically we have a situation with MDM, or mobile device management, where you focus on the device. Who owns the device and is it secure? What we see now is much more management of the applications and the data rather than the device. And so that's called light mobile management. This one is Orange, Mobile Enterprise, which is the enterprise mobile division of Orange, focused on multinational corporations, global corporations. And what you see here is they're striving for comprehensiveness. So here you have devices, connectivity, application services, by which they mean UC and some business applications, and then security, right? And Orange has, I know they have a security operations center here in the area, and they have these globally. So they've built out their security services. But still, it's a little bit focused on the devices and the connectivity. So Orange has tried to take a broader approach for years. We do a lot of the contract analysis, and we see that most of their mobile contracts are around that device and global connectivity piece. So they're still a little bit kind of mobile connection centric, like most telcos would be, even though they're trying to broaden out. And then the final one I wanted to talk a little bit about is Vodafone. So Vodafone is very interesting because I think they're best in class for what they do. So we've done some analysis in Europe, and actually they were the furthest top and to the right in our analysis of different providers. When we think of mobility as mobile connections, management of that connectivity, provisioning of the devices, service around the device and the fleet of devices, and mobile application management and other aspects, and tariffing and billing. They're very solid in that core. And they have a wonderful tariff called Vodafone Red. I say it's wonderful because they're not paying you or anything, because I think it's great, right? It prevents overages. You just step up to the next tier if one of your employees uses a lot more data. It's very competitive on roaming. So they get the basics right. Now they're beginning to invest a little bit more in a few things. The first one is reporting. They feel like they need to go deep with analytics to provide their enterprise clients with a lot more analytics about who's using what where, who's billing for what, where savings can be made, how the service can be optimized. The second thing they're doing is they had a group of mobile application developers, about 200 in the Middle East. And I think they're based in Egypt. And they will work, when a client asks for them for help, they will work on it. But they never were facing forward. They never said, we do mobilized applications, right, for particular business requirements. Now they're saying they struck a relationship with AppDirect to offer their clients mobile applications from the AppDirect catalog. And that's a good sign that they're moving away from connectivity a little bit more towards mobile application services. And then MaaS means mobility as a service. So what that is a little bit like the T-Systems offer in the sense that you get your suite of services on a commercial basis is per user per month. So it's almost like all of your mobile requirements outsourced, right? From the device and security through to application, billing, etc., all outsourced on a per user per month basis. Vodafone and Sprint out of the US are both kind of probably leaders in that enterprise mobility as a service area, where things are packaged up in a way that looks like a per user per month on-demand service, and essentially is a kind of outsourcing of this complex set of services. So that's really what I have to share with you today. I'm very happy to have a discussion or take questions, or however you would like. Okay, thank you for letting me off easy.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
The respondents that you have done your survey, they are from which industry?
So this was across all industries.
All industries.
All industries, yes. So it was 400 from Singapore, 400 from the United States, 400 from the United Kingdom. But we did gather their industries, and I don't have the data with me, but there was no restriction on which industries were included.
Was that randomly?
Yeah, you had to be employed, you had to have a smartphone. So these were the qualifications, and you had to be between 18 and 35. Whereas, I should say actually, the decision maker survey, we have specific industry demographics. So for the decision makers, this was, we have about between 10 and 15% of 7 or 8 industries. We are the public sector as well as the banking, manufacturing, retail.
Why is it 18 to 35? Because retirement age is going up and workers are getting older and they are also using smartphones above 35. So why have you specifically focused on that group? Do you think their responses would be very, very different from?
No, it's a great question. So actually, I kind of contextualize it to say that these trends are evident in all age groups at work. It's just that we felt by doing 35 and under that we would see the most extreme cases. So the idea was to say that, you know, this is a gradual, I mean, it's not like when you're 36 you're not interested in this stuff. Not at all. It's just that we tried to say, well, given that these people in 5 or 10 years will probably be making some IT decisions, what do they want? But it's very much a continuation of a trend. So when we did this research about 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have the age restriction, and the kind of proportions of responses were very similar. So just a little less, just a little lower percentage. Like instead of 66, it might have been 55% or 50% saying they want to use their own tech at work. So this just shows, it's just to drive the extremes. But I totally agree with you that change at work is not limited to people 35 and under. It never has been. And I also think just because someone wants something doesn't mean we should give it to them. So that's the other thing. Is I'm not advocating for doing everything they want. That would be silly. They have to compromise. But we just wanted to see what the most tech-savvy people wanted out of work, what the social media generation wanted out of work. But none of these came out, you know, completely as a surprise. They've been evident for years with other cohorts at work. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.